Welcome everyone to our webinar tonight on pre-K. We're going to give it just a few minutes to let everybody get into our webinar. So welcome and bear with us just for a minute. We have a really great program for you tonight. While we're waiting, I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Yvonne Brandon. I'm Chair of Public Schools First NC. We are a statewide public education child advocacy organization. We've been around since around 2013. Tonight we have invited two very special guests to be with us to talk about NC pre-K, possibilities, the barriers, and things that are going on. I think many of you are attending tonight because you're already aware of the importance of pre-K to our children and to our economy and to our families throughout North Carolina. So tonight we are going to try to find out a lot more about what's going on right now with pre-K, what kids are being served, what kids need our services, and then also we are going to look at one of the largest school systems in the state, Wake County, to see some of the model programs and the way that they're managing and leveraging NC pre-K in Wake County. So we're really excited to be here. I will like to tell you that if you can turn your phone off, or I think you should be muted. We are going to allow plenty of time at the end of our first presenter. We're going to stop for a moment in case there's any quick questions. At the end of our second presenter, we will then kind of open the floor back up again for questions and answers. So there's going to be plenty of time for you to share your thoughts or ask questions of our experts here tonight. We're going to start with introducing our first presenter tonight, Elizabeth Byrum. Thank you so much for being here. She is a native of North Carolina. She is a proud pet owner, and I think she's an outdoor adventurer. I love the way she describes herself as with her pets and her activities. But one thing that she does that I'm so impressed by is the work she's done as a policy analyst at NC Child. Elizabeth collaborates with lots of early childhood advocates all across the state of North Carolina to advance policies that support and sustain and strengthen our child care system, working with providers, working with teachers and families, and working with young children, the most importantly. She received her Master's of Social Work and Master's of Public Health degrees, both from UNC Chapel Hill. And she is really one of the most well-informed advocates for early childhood education and NC pre-K that we have in the state. So we're really proud to have her here tonight. And then we also are joined tonight by a second presenter, and that is Dawn Dawson. And Dawn is the Senior Director for the Office of Early Learning. She also has a master's degree from education from NC State University. She has served in lots of roles from teacher to senior director within the Wake County public school system. She's worked in curriculum instruction. She's worked with federal programs and student support programs. She is really the expert, the person who manages all these programs that go to help support our public school system, all those pre-K programs and early learning programs that merge into our kindergarten program. So she has been, was the first senior director in the Office of Early Learning. And she has been there and involved in this program since its beginning. So we have two great experts here tonight. Now I'm going to stop for a second sharing my screen, and Elizabeth will let you have that opportunity. And thank you again for being here. There we go.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to get my slides set up, but I so appreciate the opportunity to share with you all, and Yvonne and Len and Elizabeth, for your support. And I'm excited to hear any questions from y'all as we talk about early childhood. So I'm going to start my slides. If someone just wants to verbally let me know that they can see them, because I will, you all will disappear. We're good? Great. All right. Well, as Yvonne mentioned, I'm from NC Child, and we are a children's advocacy agency in North Carolina, supporting all children across the state, regardless of their place of birth, their ethnicity, their zip code, and making sure that all children and families have what they need to grow up successful. And so my role really is focused specifically on early childhood education advocacy. And as many of you all probably know, it's a very complex, wonky field, but one of the most critical in the lives of young children and their families. So I'm going to spend tonight talking a little bit about the data behind the system in our state, as well as the current policy landscape, both federal and state, and then sort of where advocates are right now in terms of what we want to see happen, ideally this year as we gear up for the legislative session starting next week, but also in the long term, and the importance of all of us working together to make that happen. So starting with the lay of the land, what's happening with early childhood education in North Carolina, and who is it serving and who is it not serving? So early childhood education facts and figures, I've had these kind of come on one by one because I want to see if folks are actually welcome to shout out answers if they know them. But in the state of North Carolina, we have 715,000 children who are ages birth to 5. And that represents over 30% of all children in our state under 18. So it's a large age group. Therefore, we know investments like education, health are so critical for young children because they really are developing the majority of their brain by the time they're 3 years old. And so of those children, I can't see the chat, but if folks want to put guesses on how many children are actually served currently in our childcare system, you're welcome to do it. And Yvonne or Elizabeth or Dawn or Lynn, if you want to call any answers that folks are putting, but how many children do we think are actually in our childcare system in North Carolina?
This is Lynn. I'm watching the chat, so I don't
Thank
see
you.
anything yet. So Yvonne guesses 50,000.
Okay.
And someone says 15,000, 15,000, 50,000, and then 300,000 is another guess.
All right, those are excellent guesses. So I'm going to go ahead and reveal where we're at. So the 300 was the closest, but I can totally understand where we would be with all those guesses because the point is that we don't have enough children in our childcare programs. So we've got almost 250,000 children that are currently enrolled in childcare programs, and that is all programs across the state. And I pulled this number as of April 2020. So as we all know, the pandemic has really shaken things up, and we have seen a decrease in enrollment since April 2020 because we're really struggling with a lot of the issues that we'll talk about tonight. So we're a little bit closer to 217,000 children who are currently enrolled. However, that only represents 35 to 40% of all children in our state that are in a program like NC PreK, like a private childcare center, a family childcare home. And so that's a pretty low percentage. And we know that quality childcare is so important for development, for future success. It's really important for all of us to figure out how can we get more children and more families to be able to access affordable, high quality care. And in terms of the total childcare programs, I'm going to spend some time really digging into NC PreK because I know that is of particular interest and really relevant to the issues that you all work on. But NC PreK is just one type of program that we have in North Carolina. We have close to 6,000, so 5,788 total licensed programs. In North Carolina, we are counting programs that go through the licensing system. There are probably other programs and settings where children are being cared for, but we really kind of consider the system as licensed programs. And those include centers, family childcare homes, public school settings, which we know include a lot of NC PreK classrooms, Head Start classrooms, early Head Start. So we really have a diverse sort of mixed delivery system in North Carolina. And as you can see, I actually also, the number I had pulled was also from pre-pandemic. And so we're down a little bit in terms of programs as well as of March of this year. So that's a little bit about just the lay of the land and who we're talking about, how many children we're talking about. I will note that in terms of, NC Child, we do a lot of work to try to make sure we are disaggregating data by race and ethnicity to make sure that we are aware of how children of different races or ethnicities are experiencing issues in our state. And the percentage of children who are birth to 5 in each sort of racial category we track is actually pretty similar. So it's right around that 30% when it's disaggregated by race as well. All right, so NC Child every year, one of our big projects, which I'll make sure to share this like afterwards, is our county data cards. They were just released, so the data that you are seeing in these graphics is brand new data that we've been tracking. But we know that early childhood education is really critical for things like third grade reading. And in our state right now, only 45% of children across the state are reading proficiently in the third grade. And so a lot of the work we are doing is really helping to move the needle on that particular indicator. I also think it's really important to note how many children in North Carolina are also living in poverty. And we know that childcare is a way to increase family stability because it allows parents to go to work. Childcare is really a lifeline so that parents know that their children are being cared for in a safe, nurturing place, and that they're able to go find a job. But we also know that childcare is incredibly expensive. And so for many families, it is out of reach, which then further impacts their ability to have a job, to be able to provide for their family. So I wanted to call attention to those two really recent data points. Some other information, I just mentioned that the cost of infant care is incredibly expensive. I am not a parent, but I can not even imagine for all of you parents out there, how much you're having to spend each month, each year for childcare. Infant and toddler care we know is the most expensive. So this figure here is sort of towards the high end for a single child, but we know every year, depending on the age of the child, families are spending between $5,000 and $12,000 per year. When you have multiple children under the age of 5, that can creep up to like $20,000 a year, which is really cost prohibitive for any family, but particularly our low and middle income families. Also, because it's so expensive, we know that it's important to have access to programs that allow families to receive financial support. So North Carolina, one of those programs is the Child Care Subsidy Assistance Program. This provides families who are eligible with support in paying for childcare for their children birth to 5. However, right now, only 55,000 eligible children are actually receiving childcare subsidy, and that's about 25% of eligible families. The income threshold for childcare subsidy is 200% of the federal poverty line, which is about $52,000, $53,000 for a family of 4. So we know there's many families who make just over that amount who are still unable to access care because the price of care is not changing just because they're not eligible for child care subsidy. Another issue with child care subsidy, even though it is an incredibly important program, is that there's often a wait list. So right now, the wait list, I say that this is better than what we've seen. There's still close to 7,000 families on the wait list right now. And that number is lower than usual, thanks to some of the federal relief that I'll be talking about that we received during the sort of height of the pandemic. But that wait list has been as high as like 30,000 families. And so having, childcare subsidy is really great, but if you are stuck on the wait list for 3 years, you might not actually ever be able to use that subsidy that you're eligible for in a program. Or perhaps you receive the subsidy, but as we've seen now, where programs are struggling to keep their doors open, there might not be anywhere for your child to go. There might not be a slot for your child because a classroom had to close or a program had to close in your community. So that, again, sort of paints a dire picture on really, we're not serving the huge need that is in our state to make childcare affordable. The next piece of, kind of program that we really think about that is for families who are needing that support financially to access childcare is NC PreK. So NC PreK, again, is another targeted program. The eligibility is a little bit different than the childcare subsidy, but it is for 4-year-olds. Who their families are at 75% of the state median income, or they have other qualifying kind of eligibility markers like special needs, are in foster care or child welfare, have developmental delays. So that program, again, is trying to target the most at-risk 4-year-olds. And while it's a wonderful program and it's a public preschool program that we're lucky to have in the state, it's only serving 51% of eligible 4-year-olds. And our state does have a goal to move that needle to try to get 75% of all eligible 4-year-olds into NC PreK. And right now, 37 out of 100 counties are meeting that goal. And we are 8 years away from when we were hoping to have that goal met. So these programs are so critical. And, as you can see, we're sort of struggling to begin to make progress to make sure we're serving as many families as possible. And that, as you can imagine, really comes down to investment and funding and what we are currently doing as a state to make sure these programs are as robust and serve as many families as possible. So I'll do a little bit more sort of level setting about the data within PreK. In the 2020-2021 school year, this is also right hot off the press data from the National Institute of Early Education Research. They do a state of preschool yearbook every year and do state profiles. Right now, we're serving about 24,000 4-year-olds in the most recent school year. Unfortunately, that does represent a 6% drop in the number of 4-year-olds that were enrolled the year prior. COVID really has had a huge impact on our early education system, and there are a lot of families that for a variety of reasons have not been able to re-enter that program that their child was in, whether it's because of a transition in their family's finances, whether it's because that program has struggled to stay open and keep its doors open, whether it's because of chronic exposures in the childcare setting. And so there are, over 7,000 children who are no longer being served in this really critical program. And so that's really concerning to see. Right now, we rank 27th in preschool access in the country. So we're sort of middle of the pack. I think that North Carolina has such a storied history and strong early education efforts, and we've really been on the forefront of a lot of our programming. However, as we haven't seen the level of investment we need, we're not seeing sort of the same continued results that some of the other states are seeing. And as a reminder, our PreK program serves only 4-year-olds. We are beginning to see other states actually serve 3- and 4-year-olds in their preschool programs. Fully funding PreK, I thought this was a really important number, for all low-income 3- and 4-year-olds in our state would cost $558 million. When we talk a little bit about where we are at with investment in North Carolina, you'll see that we're really far away from that number. But it's really important to know that number so that we can include that in our conversations with decision makers, to let them know that it's expensive to provide high quality preschool and childcare, but it really pays off in the future because we're really investing in the lives of our youngest residents in North Carolina. And then the last fact, just that 54,000 low-income children in North Carolina actually don't have any access to PreK. So we do have sort of an enrollment gap that goes back to the previous slide, talking about how we are only serving 51% of eligible children. And there's many more children that are eligible that just don't have a slot right now because there is no space to expand the program. So I've probably not painted a very positive picture about the state of childcare and PreK in North Carolina. However, I'm excited to talk a little bit about where we're at and the successes we have seen, and then what we can do to continue to grow that investment. So we'll do a little bit of a federal and state policy overview. And also, folks, we'll be getting a copy of these slides. So don't feel like you have to write down everything, or if I'm moving too fast, feel free to put some questions in the chat and we can answer those afterwards. So, state of the North Carolina General Assembly, early education. We are gearing up for the session, which starts next week. We're in an even year. So this year's legislative session is going to be a short session, anticipating maybe 2 to 3 months at the max. So if you follow politics in North Carolina for a while, you know that we never know what's going to happen with our General Assembly. But last year, in November of 2021, we finally passed another state budget. We had not had a state budget since 2018. So this was actually a pretty big deal. And also it was incredibly important not just to have that state investment, but also to make sure we were passing through all of the federal money that we were receiving through the American Rescue Plan and through other relief packages. So where are we in terms of early education? Unfortunately, even with increased pressure on our lawmakers to really be paying attention to this critical issue, we still receive about 1% of the total annual state budget for early childhood programs. Only 1%, and that has sort of been pretty stagnant the last several budget rounds. Most of the funding that is received in this state that is funding our programs is actually is federal funding. And so the state is responsible for sort of a match to that funding, but again, hasn't done much more than what is required of them in terms of investments. At the same time, we still like to celebrate the small wins. So last year we did see some additional state investment for the programs in North Carolina. This included additional $10 million every year for our Smart Start network. It also included a small, very modest, as I call it, NC PreK rate increase. The NC PreK rates have been stagnant for a very long time, which means that a lot of providers are hesitant to actually expand that program because they're not receiving enough money to support an additional child to attend their NC PreK program. So that rate increase is about 2% each year. However, the governor did recommend it closer to like a 16% total increase. So it wasn't quite where we wanted to see it. We didn't see any additional childcare investments in expanding subsidy access for families, excuse me, in teacher compensation efforts, making sure we can pay our teachers, you know, a living wage so they'll stay in early education settings. And we didn't see any additional money to increase the rate for the childcare subsidy. So both, you know, we've got those two subsidized programs, NC PreK and then childcare subsidy, and they both have very complex rates, but they both really need additional funding so they can expand to serve more families. And everything I just named, I now have kind of, we'll talk a little bit about in the context of the Leandro court case. We've been watching at NC Child along with our partners to make sure also that the investments we see align with the recommendations from the Leandro remedial plan, which we're so grateful really includes a continuum of educational support to make sure every child in our state has, you know, their right to a sound basic education. And so the plan does include many of the early childhood components that I just named. However, we didn't see many of those funded in the budget from last year. So this is just a recap sort of with the Leandro perspective. Only 2 strategies listed in Leandro were partially funded. So we still have a long way to go, not only on the entire plan, but also for the early education investments specifically. But you'll see that we got a little bit of money for Smart Start. The recommendation was 20 million a year instead of 10 million a year. And we did get that small NC PreK rate increase. But you'll see that we are looking at a 5.2 million investment instead of a 71.9 million investment. So our advocacy is working, but we really, you know, it's important to continue to make it clear that we need significant long-term sustainable investment in early childhood. And this webinar feels so timely because not only are we preparing for short session to gavel in on Wednesday of next week, but yesterday we saw the governor release his recommendations for budget adjustments for the budget that passed last year. So short session really is focused not as much on passing major legislation, but just doing some budget adjustments, potentially sliding some additional priorities into our budget. And so this is sort of a recap of what the governor proposed that he would like to see adjusted for the final year of this budget. And as it's, you know, very similar to what we've talked about. And so we're grateful for the governor to continue to press on all of these components of our early childhood system, and to know that all of these, again, are also the components that are reflected in Leandro. So needing that NC PreK rate increase alongside the subsidy rate increase, investing in teachers, either through the salary supplement program like wages, as well as other ways to get teachers into the system, retention and recruitment efforts. We also saw him really calling for expanding early intervention services for infants and toddlers. And so while that's not necessarily specific to early childhood education, that is a really important part of early childhood policy work. And there are a lot of overlap with making sure that our programs can serve children with special needs starting at birth. So that, I'm going to take a pause because that was a lot on the state level. So if you've got questions, if you need clarification, you can start thinking about it. I'm going to do a federal update because I know that folks might also be following what's going on there. I tell people that my life outside of my job is often just more of the same because I feel like we're always inundated with sort of the drama that we're hearing at the General Assembly or up with Congress. But federal updates, folks might remember that we were talking a lot about the Build Back Better package starting this time last year. And so where we've been is that package kind of was dead in the water starting at the end of 2021. Unfortunately, the Senate was not able to get the votes to pass that. And since then, we've sort of been stalling to try to figure out if there is any viable way to get sort of that significant reconciliation investment. in children and families. And so the most recent update is that we do actually have a new draft of the childcare pieces that the Senate has proposed. The original proposal we saw with Build Back Better was about $450 billion for the country to help provide that universal pre-K program, to increase access to childcare by subsidizing it for most families, including middle income families. So this new proposal has boiled it down to about 150 to 200 billion, and is utilizing existing programs. So it doesn't actually have the same bones from the Build Back Better. It's not yet proposing a universal pre-K program. And I think we'll just have to see if this is going to get passed, and if this, again, is a stepping stone to hopefully getting additional investment to make early childhood education accessible to all families. That's why I put that reminder here. It's still important to keep pushing for the inclusion of additional funding, even when the policies kind of change and we are in a very different place than we were before. Also, what's happening now, that's the reconciliation process, sort of a separate special set of circumstances for investment opportunities. We're also seeing Congress begin to vote just for our annual appropriations, which really can allow us to get some additional funding for programs like Head Start, home visiting, programs that, funding that supports our NC Pre-K program and supports our Subsidy program in North Carolina. So there's a lot of ways for folks to be plugging in. I'll share sort of an action alert that we have live now where you can talk about why childcare and pre-K is so important to you. If you'd like, it's an email that we send to our federal delegation that we've had up for a couple months, just reminding them that, we need to be thinking about this. And even if folks don't agree with how we're going to solve this issue, that we need to see investment, or else we're going to really see a collapse of the industry. This is just a little bit of a reminder of kind of where we've been. I joined NC Child right sort of at the end of 2020, so kind of at the height of the pandemic. This is really a unique situation where we've seen all this sort of extra federal funding. However, it's all been time limited. And so I think that is an interesting part of how we approach the work that we're doing in North Carolina, is to remind our legislators that, yes, we are so grateful for all this federal relief. It's been really important for childcare, but it's going to end in 23 and 24, and we really need the state to consider, increasing its own investment in childcare. And so the numbers in the red reflect the amount of money that North Carolina received. A lot of money. So, close to like $1.7 billion over 2 years. And right now we are in the process of continuing to support providers with stabilization grants, and then also continuing to expand subsidy for families, which is why our wait list is beginning to tick down. We were able to use some of these relief dollars to address those needs. Here's another overview of just the specific ways North Carolina has been using the federal childcare relief dollars. I will say, in terms of NC Pre-K versus the sort of childcare programs and what they have access to, because NC Pre-K is a public program, it has not been eligible for this, many of the same programs that our private and sort of nonprofit childcare settings have been. However, we know that a lot of programs sometimes offer multiple programs. They might be a childcare center, and they also might have a couple NC Pre-K classrooms. And so, again, a lot of childcare is braiding funding together and trying to make it work. So the majority of what you're seeing here didn't necessarily apply, all of it applied to the NC Pre-K program specifically, just because that program is a publicly funded program. And then at the bottom, my reminder, however, the relief funds are going to run out in spring 2023. And that is the message we are really beginning to take to legislators. We've heard that childcare, unfortunately, is not necessarily in the top priorities for this session, but they have the tools and they can use them to put the investments where they need to, because without additional action now, we're not going to get another state budget until at earliest June 30th of 2023. And so we're really beginning to sound the alarm that this time next year, we could see the childcare system, collapse back into crisis without additional investment. I'm just going to keep reminding folks that the funds are so critical. So the time for advocacy is now, which brings me to sort of an overview of our actual priorities that we're working on this year as advocates. And then, some call to action for you all if you're interested in joining us to push some of these priorities forward. So we've really thought about how do we communicate about the urgent needs of early childhood education, about all of our programs from NC PreK to Head Start to our center-based care in a way that folks can really understand, because it is very confusing between all the different funding streams, different programs. And so we have sort of 3 buckets of priorities. And the first one is around accessibility, really making sure that child care programs are accessible to working families in our state. And so this priority that I have listed here is actually, we're in the 2nd year of this campaign, and it is on NC Child's formal legislative agenda. It's a very kind of nuanced policy, but really what it boils down to is giving programs that serve children who receive subsidized care, sort of the subsidy assistance program, a higher rate to serve those children. Right now in the state of North Carolina, we do rates based on age, based on the license status, the quality status of a program, as well as the county the program is in. And so that means a lot of our rural counties are receiving hundreds and thousands of dollars less per child per month to serve, the same population, and have the same expectation of quality, and have the same, try to pay their teachers the same wage. And so that's really difficult. And that means that we've got programs that are going to have to close their doors, and oftentimes in communities that already have limited programs to begin with, which is our rural communities, particularly far west and far east. And so we call it the subsidy market rate kind of proposal. And really, this is about moving us forward. I know Yvonne knows a lot about this because she might help with the market survey that helps establish the rates. But we see this again as sort of a foundational way to change the financing of childcare. And while this specifically applies to subsidy, we see a similar need in the NC PreK program. Right now, we need to expand NC PreK to those 54,000 children who are eligible but aren't able to attend. But to do that, we need to increase the reimbursement rate that providers get for accepting a child in the NC PreK program. Right now, we're hearing that providers, because that rate has not been, adjusted significantly, they're not able to add that program to their center or to their school. And that means that families are missing out on really important educational opportunities. And that means that families are having a hard time, going back to the workforce and providing for their family. So it's a nuanced issue, but it really boils down to getting more working families access to childcare and keeping childcare centers open to serve them. The second priority is around staffing. And so we have seen, and I'm sure folks have seen on the news, sort of as the childcare community has been in crisis, one of the big issues is the wages that our teachers receive. Being an educator is an incredible, rewarding and challenging career. And a lot of our educators are making $12 an hour. Despite all of their qualifications, despite many of them continuing their education. And so while some of that, again, comes back to changing the financing structure of the childcare system, which I alluded to in the previous priority, we also know we can invest more in programs to help create more equity in salaries across the state. And so one of those is the Childcare Wages Program, which is a recruitment and retention program providing salary supplements to educators. And that program right now is in 57 counties. And so we would really like to see an investment to help expand it to all 100 counties. And this program, again, is open to all educators who work in an early childhood setting. And there are sort of some qualifications based on education. And then, there are a couple nuances between counties, but right now, almost half the state doesn't even have access to this program. And so teachers, with no other options, are leaving to go to jobs at a fast food restaurant, at Target, where they can make, $15, $16, $20 an hour. And that's a huge loss to our sector because it's not easy just to find incredibly qualified and gifted teachers to come staff programs. And then the last sort of category, if you don't remember anything else tonight, hopefully you'll remember our 3 kind of priorities: accessibility, staffing, and affordability. So affordability, this just is a reminder to continue to fund the strategies that we know that work, that expand childcare access for children and families, Of course, this includes addressing NC pre-K, increasing the rates for NC pre-K, and then allowing ourselves to increase the slots. So making sure we are maximizing the potential of that program. Also investments for Smart Start, which in many cases is actually an administrator of NC pre-K, also helps provide subsidy to families, helps families find high quality care in their community, and then addressing additional components of childcare subsidy assistance. We talked a little about that sort of rate issue, but also we know that childcare subsidy assistance, a lot more families that are eligible could use support paying for care. So what would it look like to expand eligibility, to create, to really put a huge investment so we can clear the wait list and make sure we don't have an ongoing wait list. Those are sort of the aspirational, maybe in some people's eyes, things that we really think are necessary to make sure our system in North Carolina is serving all families, and is continuing to grow and be known as a leader in our country, as making North Carolina a great state for early education. So that is sort of what we are really working on as advocates. And when I say we, it's NC Child, but it's many of our other state level partners, including Public Schools First, on helping to communicate why we need investment in each of these areas to sustain our system. And so I'm almost wrapping on my portion of the presentation. I know I've talked a lot and I've probably shared an overwhelming amount of information, but I just wanted to share a little bit about how we're getting that message across. And this is an example of our sort of shared priorities document that I'll make sure folks have access to after the webinar. But I wanted to share some of the language, and some of that language really, again, is honing in on the importance of early childhood education to prepare children for their future. We've done a lot of sort of message testing, sending stuff to legislators and getting their honest opinion on what works and what moves them and what doesn't move them. And it all comes back to really focusing on the child and really communicating how important this opportunity is for the child, connecting it to the third grade reading scores that we'd like to see in the state, connecting it to high school graduation. The other kind of component of the messaging is around families and making sure families actually have the choice to send their child to the program that they want. And right now, many families don't have that choice, and they're not even able to, find any programs for their child. And so it's supporting families, it's supporting children. And ultimately, this isn't here, but it's on sort of later down in this document, how does this also really improve our economy for the future, and make sure that parents can go to work, children can learn in nurturing environments, and continue to be set up for success, and ultimately we give back to our state as they mature and become adults. And so we've done a lot of work to try to get that message right, try to keep legislators out of the really complex weeds of policy in the early childhood education space, but also really remind ourselves why we're doing this, and it's because it's about the children. So my last sort of slide is just one example of a way you can take action, and I will put this link in the in our chat, and so you can take time to peruse that if you'd like. There's lots of ways that folks can advocate, and one thing we like to remind people is that there's no right or wrong way. It's just important that you find the way that you like, that you use your voice. And so we have an advocacy toolkit at NC Child that kind of goes over the general ways that you can advocate, and also has some worksheets for folks to complete if maybe you want to call your legislator, or maybe you want to write an op-ed about this issue. We have some tools that folks can use to practice that. And then of course, the NC Child team is always here to support advocates in the field. And we are always so grateful when folks are willing to share their story and connect with us. So that is sort of my, one call to action. I will also link our federal action alert in the chat as well, if you're interested in taking action tonight or soon, to let our senators and our representatives in Washington, DC know how important childcare and pre-K is for North Carolina's children. So with that, I will pause. This is just my brief question slide. So I will take a few questions if there are any. Let me stop sharing my screen.
Elizabeth, I did see one that folks are asking, like, what is the relationship between, the spending we're doing in pre-K and the spending we're doing in public education overall? And if you don't mind, I'll help you answer that, because we just got the new NEA, which is the National Education Association rankings, and for per pupil expenditure in North Carolina, we are 41. And so, Elizabeth, what was the ranking we were for pre-K spending? You had a couple of rankings there.
Yeah, we were 27th for pre-K spending. And I don't know if there's really an equivalent number for like other childcare program spending, because it's a little more complicated to calculate because it's mostly federal funds. But we have 1% of our state budget goes to early childhood education. So that's pretty low.
Okay, so I want to go make sure. And is there anyone else that has a quick question for Elizabeth? We will also have time at the very end of the program, but I want to ask right now if somebody would like to unmute yourself or put a question in chat. I think there was another question up here. Somebody said, do voucher money, can it go or to pre-K programs? The opportunity scholarships is what he's talking about, I think.
That's a good question. Is that specifically like the subsidy program, or I don't know?
Yeah, that's like a voucher, but I will say this, that I think that what complicates that, I can't remember who asked the question, is that, you know, childcare is regulated and licensed. Voucher money that goes to private schools for K through 12 education, it goes to schools that do not have to have a lot of certified teachers. They don't have to have a lot of rules and regulations. In fact, there's very little. And the childcare industry, Elizabeth and Dawn can help me out, is very regulated to make sure that we protect our children, their health, their safety. So, you know, there would be so many other hoops to go through. I would also say the average care for child care, and it gets, is around what, 9,600. The per pupil allocation is about about $1,000 more, but you have to understand that that is for children who can be in a classroom of, you know, 20 and 25 and 30, and depending on age, that is not allowed in licensed childcare centers. So I don't know if that helped. That was a good answer or not, Elizabeth, but let's see, there's another question down here. How does the state versus local proportion for reimbursements relate to the rate increases you discussed? Will that reduce the local responsibility?
Oh, specific to NC pre-K, I'm assuming?
60-40, yes.
Dawn looks like she's shaking her head because I am not as in the weeds about the financing of NC pre-K. So I actually don't know the answer to that question. But Dawn, if Dawn knows, or I can help get that answer if we need to. Feel free.
Well, let's go ahead and move to Dawn, because I think we want to make sure we get her information in there. And
Yvonne, this is Susan Evans. I had a question I put in the chat, and I think you missed it.
I did not see it. There it is, Susan. Go ahead and answer your question, please.
I just need to understand the child care subsidy. I'm not clear. Is that a federal program that the funding just passes through the state, or is that a completely state controlled program?
It's a great question. It is federal funding. So it is a block grant that North Carolina receives. There is a state match for a portion of that block grant, but that money is just passed through kind of when they do the budget.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought. Thank you.
And that is part of what Elizabeth was talking about earlier, when she says that they have to every 2 years do a survey to establish the market rates, and that is required by the feds. And they use that information to decide if they're going to, how much money to allocate and so forth. So, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Lynn and Dawn.
All right, Lynn, you ready for me just to go ahead and get started?
Yes, because I'm watching the time. We're going to try to respect everybody's time. Go ahead, Dawn. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So good evening. I'm Dawn Dawson, and Elizabeth, I just want to say I really enjoyed your information. Thank you. I also want to thank you, the entire group, for the opportunity to share the early childhood work that's happening in Wake County. And as Elizabeth gave you that state level perspective, I would like to give you a school district perspective, what it really looks like on the ground in a community. And as noted earlier, we are the largest school system in North Carolina. So I'm going to go to the next slide there. And what does, public pre-K look like in Wake County? So we're really fortunate in our county to have a pre-K collaborative that's made up of our school system. It's also made up of our local Smart Start agency, who is the administrator of NC pre-K funds in our community. So in each community that's different, but for Wake County, it is our local Smart Start agency, along with Telamon Head Start is also in our collaborative. And although we have different criteria for each program, we do have a shared application to make it easier for families to apply for any of the 3 programs rather than doing individual applications. So we have a process as a collaborative that we work through to place families where the best fit is. And you're going to hear a little bit more about the different types of programs and the different criteria that we're referring to here. And in our county, our NC pre-K programs are located in, we have private sites, public schools, and Telamon Head Start centers. So those are the different locations. And the goal really is to provide a high quality experience for all students, whether they're in that Title I program, whether they're in an NC pre-K program or a Telamon Head Start. Even though we have the different criteria and different regulations, they are all very much high quality experiences for students. So I do want to do just a high level review of the different types of classrooms that are in our school system and in our county, actually, not just in the public schools, but our county. I thought it would be helpful to have that bigger perspective, more comprehensive. So NC pre-K students do serve students meeting income eligibility, 75% of median income. Elizabeth did mention this in the newest numbers I have right here. So for like a family of 4 is 63,000. Is 75% of median income currently. That's the newest rate. And then for Title I pre-K, we serve students with academic need. So that shared application is still used, just like like I mentioned earlier. But for this particular program, students must have a screening. So the reason why that screening is important, along with a parent survey, is because that information is used to rank order and determine who has the greatest academic need. So unlike Telamon Head Start and NC pre-K, Title I is based on academic need. Now, some students qualify for both, but that is something that is unique. And Title I is federally funded. So our blended classrooms that we have, and this is something we've been working on for years within the school system to really have a more inclusive model. So this is a program that we've really been growing. We serve 6 students with disabilities and 9 who have been identified through the Title I application process, so that students with disabilities have more typically developing models. And we know what the research says about just that is a better setting for all students in that situation and learning from each other. So this does provide more inclusive settings using the blended classroom model. Sometimes people forget or they don't know about our preschool special education classrooms. And we serve students with disabilities who require special ed based on their individualized education program. And in those classrooms, we have even a lower student to teacher ratio because we have students who have all different types of needs. So it is based on their IEP. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And of course, Head Start, which is 100% federal poverty rate. I think Elizabeth shared that with you as well. And I'm looking at our most current numbers for that too. And for federal poverty, that particular rate for a family of 4, it's 27,000. So that kind of gives you an idea about what those figures look like. All right. And then next, we're going to move to a little more information on NC pre-K. So that's our next slide. So for those of you who don't have like a deep understanding of NC pre-K, I just wanted to provide you with some details. So NC pre-K does require a BK licensed teacher. They also have a classroom assistant as well, and they use creative curriculum, which is what Head Start uses. That is also what Title I pre-K uses. And the goal with NC pre-K is really to serve those 4-year-olds who meet income and age requirements. And this came up during Elizabeth's presentation. And although NC PreK is funded through the state, there is a gap that is created because of some of those things that were discussed. And like our local Wake County Smart Start has had to use some of their funds as well as request funding from county commissioners to really bridge that gap. So we've been fortunate in Wake County to have some support around that, but there are some challenges with getting those amounts up to what they need to be because it's not fully funded from the state at the level, like the market rate for Wake County especially. And we feel like, so offering the different classroom settings really does give parents a choice. Some parents really want their child to be in a public school, especially if they have an older sibling, or they really want their child to be excited for kindergarten. Others really like a private provider, like they might have a younger sibling there, or they already have relationships with that particular provider. And the other thing about Head Start, some families really want to be in that type of setting because what's unique about Head Start, they serve not only the child, but the family. They have a tremendous amount of resources and support for the family as a unit and for parents. So they have a more comprehensive approach than some of the other programs that I've described. And you'll see there that we do have about just over 1,500 slots for NC PreK within Wake County through the school system, Telemon, Head Start, and private providers. All right, so the next, I'd like to highlight two of the most common pre-K types in the school system. And I've mentioned them before, but just a little more detail. So our Title I pre-K programs are located in elementary schools and based on academic need. Now, not every one of our elementary schools does have a Title I pre-K program, but we have, it's about 90%. Some have one, some have three. Like our current model is for every elementary school that opens to have 2 pre-K classrooms. And they're either blended, Title I, special ed, but that is part of our capital improvement. And when we do build a school, that is part of the prototype. It is a full day program. We use creative curriculum, as I mentioned. And these programs are funded by federal Title I, but we also provide if we have a student, for example, that qualifies for academic need, but also income and is NC PreK eligible, those funds are used to supplement. So this really is a combination of utilizing federal dollars as well as NC PreK funds. So that's a unique situation in our district. Our next, so the federal and state mandates. So when I mentioned earlier about sometimes people aren't aware of the number of services that we have for students ages 3 to 5, that is an actual mandate and a federal regulation. Not just federal, it's also state statute. So some of the surrounding mandates around that are relevant. So for Child Find, we are required by law to locate, evaluate, and identify all children with disabilities. So that is the job of the school system. And so earlier when Elizabeth was talking about early intervention, and like for us, it's the CDSA, those children then come to us and there's a transition process. But oftentimes those children may not be found until they're 3 or 4. So that is our obligation as the school system to locate, evaluate, and identify those children. It is also the responsibility of the school district to provide those children with disabilities a free, appropriate public education. And that public education is based on the IEP. So that individualized education program and what is determined based on that evaluation. And of course, that is together with the family that occurs. Another important factor is not only that we have to provide an appropriate educational plan, but the goal is to also serve those children alongside children without disabilities. So that blended model that I described, That's really important. We have federal indicators around that. So those are some of the complex things that we have to work through. So when we look at inclusive models, that really is the best for students. So continuing along with that theme with preschool special ed. So as I mentioned, the students who are eligible, they really, special ed is, it's a continuum. We serve students in speech, it might be a speech only, it might be all the way to being in a full day classroom. It all depends on that individualized education program for that student. So that the most intensive support really is full day and part day classrooms, and that really has to address the student's needs. And again, we are required by law to provide these opportunities. So you can imagine we have all type, and I mentioned we have to evaluate these children. So evaluation teams looks like a psychologist, speech language pathologist, case manager, team teacher, sometimes an occupational therapist, sometimes a physical therapist, sometimes a feeding specialist. So all of those people do, along with the parents, work together to do that evaluation and come up with that IEP. These classrooms that I'm referring to are funded. We have local funds, state and federal that support these. And unfortunately, although this is required by law, full funding is not provided by the federal and state level. So local funding has been essential for us. Over the last, I would say 7 to 8 years, every year as part of our school system's proposed budget, we have had a proposal for pre-K so that we can serve pre-K students. And some of the students that we're referring to in those proposals are students with special needs. So that local funding is also essential. So Lynn, before we jump to the next slide, I want to ask them, so if you'll hold just a sec, I would love to find out and get some thoughts in the chat. How many 4-year-olds do you think are in Wake County? How many 4-year-olds do you think are in Wake County? What guesses do we have? All right, we have 12,000, 4,000, 10,000, 7,500, 50,000. These are great guesses. Anybody else? All right, well, somebody was so close and gets the prize. 12, as of January 2022, we have 12,911 4-year-olds. Ms. Evans, was that you that said 12,000? I think it was. So
yes, and so I just happened to be informed that wasn't a guess.
Great. And so before we still go to the next slide, so of 12,911 4-year-olds in Wake County, how many do you think are served in public pre-K? So I'm talking public pre-K, whether it's NC pre-K through a child care center, whether it's through a Title I, whether it's through special ed, Telemon Head Start. I'm not talking about non-licensed programs. I'm talking about public, or even like a church center or anything like that. I'm talking about a public pre-K that is free. How many of those 12,911 do you think are being served in Wake County? Y'all are really good. All right. So if we total all those categories from Title I to NC pre-K to preschool special ed and Telemon Head Start, the current in January of 22 was 3,709. Again, that was 3,709. So in Wake County, we are like, we have definitely, we still have a ways to go, but we are definitely headed in the right direction. And a lot of people were really close there. So thank you. Thank you. Just wanted to do a check-in what people thought about those numbers. All right, so here are the actual numbers. And you can see, I just wanted to kind of give you that breakdown. Again, this is January 2022 data. You'll see that it's broken down by We have the NC PreK numbers for private childcare, Head Start, Title I. You'll see there's also those additional tell them on Head Start, because remember that's federal. And then we have additional Title I that is federal. And we also do some supplementing for NC PreK. And then Wake County Public Schools, that's preschool special ed, full and half day programs. You will see there the 1,268. So that just kind of gives you a big picture. And I see this question about a comment in the chat here about, I'd love to address that later at the end about that comment, because thank you for sharing that. So that just gives you a big picture of Wake PreK numbers. Then when we look at our current local investment, we do have a significant local investment for the school system for PreK. But as I mentioned, I talked about the staffing of evaluation teams. And when I gave you those categories of individuals like speech, psychologists, team teachers, case managers, OTPTs, we have in Wake County schools, we have 11 evaluation teams. That's how many students we are processing and identifying all the time for preschool special ed and that early intervention piece. Of course, those funds are used for teachers, direct services for itinerant teachers and instructional assistants as well. We do have a significant amount of funding that does come from federal and state. Like for example, like our federal Title I budget is $8.3 million. And overall for all of our preschool support, it's about $22 million from the state. We also do have some grants that support us. And again, they're time bound and limited, but that's about $4 million. And just to kind of give you a big picture, and I'm not even including the teachers here in our schools, we have probably about 135 people between evaluation teams, between supporting schools, doing screenings and all of that work. So it is a large number. So Wake County Smart Start also receives funding to supplement NC PreK, what I talked about with the difference between what the rate is and what like the market rate is in Wake County. So they have received funding to supplement NC PreK in child care centers, and then 3 School. So that is a new program that is very exciting that focuses on 3-year-olds and that year before NC PreK, and having a high quality program for them to attend. And that is very exciting for our community. And this year they received $350,000 for the pilot year, and that is going extremely well. This year is focused on research and planning, but you'll see in the next slide that we'll go to next, the future investment. So the future investment is really for the district, for the school system. We have a 5-year plan, and that 5-year plan would increase the number of our PreK classrooms to an additional 23. So that would give us a total of 192 PreK classrooms in Wake County Public Schools. So that does also include staffing for a PreK center. We are very excited about that. We've done some work around density and where the target areas are, and our hotspot, we were able to find a location, and our goal is for that to open fall of 2023. So we are very excited about that PreK center as well. We will, of course, utilize those federal Title I funds, federal and state special education funds, but there will continue to be a need for local funding. There is no doubt about that, just because the pace does not keep up with the need of those students qualifying. Wake County Smart Start is also requesting additional funding to support those reimbursement rates that have been mentioned, especially so that NC PreK private sites can really increase that BK license teacher pay, because currently that pay, even though they have the same BK certification in a child care center and might be an NC PreK teacher, it is not the same pay amount that a Wake County Public School System BK teacher licensed teacher gets in the school system. So there's a disconnect that is not aligned, and that is one of the things that they're working to work on, which is what the 840,000 is focused on doing. And as I mentioned, 3 schools, such an exciting program, and that this request will pilot 7 classrooms, that projected 1.7 million. So really to continue that expansion of the 3 school program, which is, again, just so wonderful for our community. So kind of just in summary, like some of our challenges, you know, although we have done great work as a collaborative, and we feel like we were doing a great job as far as making a difference for children and family in our community to really prepare them for success in kindergarten, there do continue to be challenges, and funding is a significant issue, because as I've mentioned, the federal and state do not provide enough support. So along with that funding, there are concerns around staffing. It is becoming more and more challenging to find teachers that are PreK certified and instructional assistants because of the pay. And Elizabeth shared this as well. And that is definitely a challenge. And so recruiting and even retaining is something that we're struggling with. And that's for the school system, that's for Head Start, that's for child care centers, that's across the board. You know, local dollars really are necessary because of federal and state funding not fully providing that support. So we're going to continue to have to request those local dollars. And another challenge is serving 3-year-olds and having those inclusive settings, which is one of the reasons why we're really excited about 3 School, because we will now have an opportunity to connect with 3 School and some of those 3-year-olds who really should be in who need special ed services, but should be in a more inclusive setting. We're hoping to have them in some of the 3 School slots so that can be the best of both worlds for all the children, all those 3-year-olds in those classrooms, with typically developing children and those with special needs. So just kind of in summary, we're going to continue to work with our partners and community leaders to advocate and, you know, try to overcome these barriers to grow our services and meet the needs of children, because we really are all committed to this work and excited about what we've accomplished, but really look forward to what we can continue to do for our community. So, Lynn, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
I am here. Sorry, you all. My name is Lynn Edmonds, and I'm the Outreach Director for Public Schools First NC. And both of you, your programs were so complementary for each other. I really love, you know, what the information that's been presented, and appreciate both of you for all the work that you put in. Dawn, do you want to address the question that you saw in chat?
Yes, I'm going to pull this up and let me take a look. It was the question about homeless, and I'm going to go all the way back up. Would you like for me to read them?
If you just want to read that one, or
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, hi, Sarah. This is from Sarah Savorny. Hello, Sarah. Okay, so it says a major challenge.
Hi, Dawn. Nice
Hello,
to see
Sarah.
you.
It's good to see your name. A major challenge for children who are homeless attending PreK is lack of transportation. They desperately need the PreK services, but have no means of transportation. Okay, so there's federal legislation called McKinney-Vento, and when we also work with social workers, and if we become aware of a student who is age eligible and are homeless, we can go through McKinney-Vento, through our social workers, we can get them placed and transportation. So anytime you hear, and that's across the board for any county, it's called McKinney-Vento, and we can absolutely make that happen, find a slot for them and provide them with transportation. It's actually a requirement.
I saw a question also about some clarity, Dawn, about when you said there's a Title I program for for pre-K in every school? Could you clarify that? Just, I got a little confused on that one fact.
Sure. Can you hear me still? Okay,
Yes.
yes. So Title I pre-K is different than like we have Title I schools. Title I pre-K is different. It's a set aside from the district Title I funds from the very start. So most of our elementary schools do have Title I pre-K classrooms or a blended model that would have Title I slots. Okay. So, but Title I pre-K is based on academic need. So all of our, maybe this is the best way to say it, almost, I would say about 90% of our schools have 1 to 3 pre-K programs. And I would say about 75 to 80% have either blended or Title I options as well, not only preschool special ed. Does that help clarify?
Yeah, and I see where Susan mentioned here, Commissioner Evans, that the 3-school program is 100% funded by the county.
Correct.
That is fabulous. And there's a place to make donations. Susan, thank you for that.
Yeah, so just to clarify, the 1.7 million that's budgeted for next year, that is just going to allow us to open this program to 100 students to pilot it. We need to eventually get to being able to offer it to about 1,500 eligible 3-year-olds. And so that is going to be a heavy lift for the county all by themselves. And so we're looking for private industry to get involved, and we're starting to work on how to make that happen. But I thought I'd go ahead and plant that seed here for anyone who can help.
That is fabulous. And, you know, of course, we all think about all the new companies coming here with lots of new jobs and offerings. And this would be so incredible if we could have them contribute to a program like this to help their labor force, their employees as well.
I wanted to acknowledge, Dawn, you know, and to the audience, we are so fortunate for the robust pre-K offerings that we have in Wake County. And I just want us to acknowledge, as we are a statewide organization, we are very aware that it's not going to look the same across the state, and that not all counties have the opportunity to have such robust programming in pre-K. So I do want to acknowledge that. We thought, I really was interested knowing that there were so many pre-K classrooms within our public elementary schools is one reason I invited Dawn, because I just found that so interesting, and then to sort of help us explore, you know, exactly how that looked across the board. So thank you so much for that. And let's see.
And it looks like Sarah had a little bit of a follow-up question there. She says, is this also true for 3 and 4-year-olds? Dawn, I think she was following up with you.
3, tell me a little bit more about that question. 3, so that apply 3. So for preschool special ed, it's ages 3 to 5. In our preschool special ed settings for Title I and for NC pre-K 4-year-olds. Does that answer?
Sarah?
Sarah, does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Yvonne, did you want to ask your question about offerings in the center? And
yeah, I was wondering if we'd ever thought about that, because I read this about something in Arizona where they're now moving towards pre-K centers where they're trying to establish those in areas where there's a lot of children appropriately by age or children with disabilities. So, you know, when you look at our county and look at the growth in the east and growth downtown, is that a possibility, Dawn, or does that make any sense?
No, so one of the things that we're really excited about with our center, I'm just looking at exactly how you phrased it, in the east and central areas. So I can share with you where our, it is at Millbrook. right near Millbrook Elementary, because when we do our density map and look at the number of students in that community, looking at poverty, looking at age, that was by far it was the largest and darkest color. We call it our density map. So we are actually looking, and our superintendent has been very open to this idea about having regional. So to answer your question, we have 3 other locations that are really, we call them hotspots, that we are looking at in the future as possible pre-K centers. So that is something that we're looking at, and facilities has been amazing. They've been amazing with that to try to help us find those locations. So to answer your question, yes.
Okay. And that is exciting because of just pulling it together, the resources and transportation becomes a lot easier when it's all centralized. So that's really kind of interesting to hear. And I've also heard where, and when there's flat enrollment or somewhat declining enrollment based on, just the age of childbearing women in our community, that it's a great way to keep a school filled. At the same time, right? All of a sudden you don't need but 30 classrooms in your elementary school and you've got 5 empty. It's a great way to bring in, 3K, pre-K or the 3-school program, I wonder. So has that been used any at all, Dawn, in terms of thinking about using our facilities and keeping all the classrooms filled? And
that is actually how, when we expanded significantly a few years ago, that is one of the things that we looked at. We did look at capacity numbers of schools, and as long as they still have, we always want to make sure though that, especially if we're putting 3 classrooms in a school, we want to make sure that the students are around that school as much as possible to build that community and to provide them with transportation. So, but that is a factor. Another thing that is brand new that we are trying, that's kind of, I didn't put this in the presentation because we are literally just piloting it this year with just a few schools, but we're looking at, because of the challenges we have with recruitment and retention of teachers, at our difficult to fill elementary schools, might we reserve some spaces for teachers' children so that they can be on, that's a huge incentive for a staff member. So that is something that we're doing at a very, this upcoming year, we're just doing it at 4 to 5 target schools. And we're going to get feedback from principals and staff to see if that made a difference or not. But we do have some schools that have a difficult time, especially, it's even been worse because of COVID, but that consistently do struggle to find staff, qualified staff.
okay.
Let me ask, does anybody have any final questions? Because we do have a few important slides to share with you in the next 12 minutes. I didn't see anything when I went back, but if anybody wants to come off mute or add a question.
Thank you for those links, Elizabeth.
Okay, Yvonne, do you want to go back to the public schools first slides, or do you want me to share?
Yeah, go ahead, Lynn, if you don't mind.
Okay. If I can get it back. All right, one moment. My apologies. Yvonne, did you want to talk about our opportunities?
Yes. While Lynn's doing that, let me go ahead and talk to you guys about a few resources we have. Elizabeth and Dawn, first of all, thank you very much. I'm so overwhelmed with all the information. It's really powerful. And one of the things that we believe in at Public Schools First is that information, facts matter, and that having information at your hand, in your fingertips, is a great way to have conversations with your legislators and with your county commissioners and with your school boards, right? Because this advocacy, as Elizabeth and Dawn have done a great job explaining, is something that goes all the way from what your school board is willing to and committed to doing to what your commissioners will be willing to plan and fund, and all the way to Congress. You know, it's not just your North Carolina legislators, but it's also what's going on in Congress. One thing that we've done is we will invite you to go to our website. We have a tremendous amount of resources there. We have a fact sheet on PreK. We encourage you to go and get that and print it out and use it as you lobby for things that you're doing. I hope you clicked on those links. We'll put those links in the follow-up email we send out to everybody also, because Elizabeth also has a dynamite advocacy toolkit and a lot of information. And she has a call to action on their page. We also as well.
I've got you, Yvonne. Thank you so much. So you all, this is just a screenshot of where you can find that brand new fact sheet. It was just wrapped up this week. So that's how you can get to it. That's our homepage and the drop-down menu under resources, and you'll find it at the very top. And then we have a petition, and that is located on, again, this is our homepage. If you go to the Engage tab, Sign Our Petition is at the very top of the drop-down, and the PreK one will be at the top of that page. And this narrative, what you see on your screen, is the narrative that is there for you to use. But if you prefer to add something or to write your own message to lawmakers, you're welcome to do that, and you're able to do that in that tool. And as you all know, at the beginning, we recorded this program. We have so many webinars and wonderful videos on our YouTube channel. And when you find our YouTube channel, you want to be sure to click videos. If you're on just the home page, you won't see everything that's available, but this will be loaded there in a few days, and you can go back to it and refer to it. And then there's lots of other programming that we've done on Leandro, about rural schools, the state budget, etc. So we invite you to find those and share those. And then finally, this is our contact information. And as Yvonne said, we will be sure to get you Elizabeth's contact information and Dawn's contact information. We're more than happy to follow up with any questions that come up for you later, or provide resources that you might be looking for. And we really appreciate your time. And Yvonne, if you have any closing remarks, I'll go on mute. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, and we can just one that I think is really important, in case you joined us a few minutes late this morning, earlier this evening, we talked about how important it was right now to communicate to our legislators. Please, please take this serious. We feel very strongly that there's an opportunity right now with a large budget surplus at the General Assembly, with the growing need for daycare, childcare, for all ages, but certainly for 3- and 4-year-olds. We think there's a great opportunity to have an increased funding. And that's why Elizabeth and Dawn and Lynn and I are here tonight, because we really want to bring attention to this issue. So you've seen there's some petitions you can sign. Another thing you can do is just simply call your legislators. Simply call your legislators and say, I'm calling to support, full funding. And one of the things I say, and you, as Lynn said, use your own words. One of the things that I say is that no needy child, no eligible child should be on a waiting list. Okay, even if you don't believe, or you don't think we should pursue universal pre-K at this point, I believe that if a child is income eligible, and to leave them on a waiting list and let them miss this critical, wonderful opportunity is really, in my personal opinion, is unethical. So yes, Lynn, thank you for letting me encourage everybody to please sign our petition. Go on Elizabeth's page, email Dawn and Elizabeth with some of your questions, and help us really spend time next week when the General Assembly returns. Let's be there with our comments and so forth. And then a final comment for those who may not be in Wake County, maybe across the state, please consider also talking to your school boards. Encourage them to do the kind of things as much as they can you heard Dawn talk about. Talk to your county commissioners. to see if there's an opportunity for them to invest, to leverage money at the local level, because we know that the need is very great and we're not going to be able to solve it with one pot of money. We will need federal money, we will need state money, we will need local money. So thank you all for coming tonight and appreciate it very much. Good night, and I hope to talk to you soon.